Good evening, welcome. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, July 17th, 2018. And the meeting will come to order. First up, I think we have a presentation from Jill Ackerman.
No, okay. Thanks for letting me come today and present to all of you. I think Rachel already passed out a copy of our vision plan to the council. We wanted to make sure that you had a copy of that as we get to the later part of this presentation. But we're going to start with just a little look back in history. So I'm sure this looks familiar to everybody. Wow Park, the Kloffenstein Amphitheater. What about this? Where's that at?
I've run through that
Thomas
myself.
Park?
Yeah, Thomas Park, Splash Pad. How about that?
Boyson?
You guys are good.
Parks.
Thomas Park.
Thomas Park.
Hey, there's Mike in the
storm shelter and indoor pavilion. So all of those places have one thing in common, and that is that they were part of our first community-wide visioning process known as Imaginate. So if we look back at 2009, the community went through a very similar process to ImagineNext, almost identical, called Imaginate, and they came up with these 8 ideas. They were Wi-Fi highway, make a splash, park it, all trails lead to Marion, eat, drink, and be Marion, which was an effort to get restaurant and entertainment venues into the community. And believe it or not, we've gotten over 20 since 2009 of those types of establishments. Marion Community Activation Network, known as Marion CAN, that was responsible for coming up with our Marion Leadership and Action program. They did a bunch of signage in the uptown. Book It was the library project, and Functions and Fitness is what we know today as the new regional YMCA. So we've made some really great progress on all of these initiatives. Wi-Fi for community wireless was up. We had a few security issues. It came back down. We're in communication with IMON. I really hope that we keep the momentum up with that particular initiative. I know that Marion Independent is going to one device this next fall, and that would be really helpful to them to just have additional bandwidth that's free to the community, because not every household has wireless capabilities.
But can you expound on that? Every student will have a device.
So, yep, everybody's going to get, I don't know what system they're using, if they're using Max or if they're using what kind of device they'll have.
iPads or something?
But
every student will have a device.
Every student will have one.
Okay.
And so what's happening, Cedar Rapids has a similar program, the Cedar Rapids district does, and a lot of students, like at night, their parents will take them down close to the library or close to the public spaces that have free wireless so that they can do their homework. And so we just want to make sure that...
Because they don't have that at home.
Because they don't have it at home, right. So that's an important one that I hope that we stay on top of. And then, of course, we've got the library that we're working on right now, and then also the Marion YMCA, which you all saw the announcement that is switching locations, which will be wonderful. With Imaginate, we engaged over 5,000 residents in brainstorming. We generated over 1,800 ideas in 6 months, and we connected and engaged new leaders for the Marion community. Throughout that process, we were able to apply to Iowa Great Places, and we made a successful application. And so we were an Iowa Great Place from 2009 to 2012. Nearly $40 million worth of development had resulted from the Imaginate process, so we consider that to be a success. And now in 2017, the fall of 2017, we launched ImagineNext, which, as I mentioned before, was a very similar process to Imaginate. So the mission of ImagineNext was to engage the greater Marion area in an open, all-inclusive discussion to develop ideas that reinforce the fact that Marion, Iowa is the best place to raise a family and grow a business. These were the sponsors of ImagineNext, including the City of Marion, so we thank you for your support of the process. And why the reason why that we did ImagineX and Imaginate is because placemaking is important. It's important to recruiting businesses. It's important to economic development. It's important to recruiting new residents, and also retaining the ones that we have. This was some initial work that our selection committee did. They did an inventory of our community, and they basically inventoried the assets that we have with regard to geography, history, the public sector, nearby features, demographics, and infrastructure. And that really helped them kind of categorize the ideas as they were working through all of the ideas that were being submitted. So here's kind of how we ended up. We trained over 100 community outreach leaders. So we did that in September. Those community outreach leaders were responsible for actually going out into the community and conducting brainstorming sessions, mostly in places where people were naturally meeting. So churches, schools, informal coffee groups, neighborhood associations, civic groups, that type of thing. We were able to engage over 6,000 residents. We generated over 3,000 ideas. A team of 23 selection committee members was appointed. The community voted, and we arrived at what is known now as the Future Four. So the first one of the four is called the Heart of It All. And basically that consists of developing a year-round plaza, potentially upgrading the Depot Pavilion, and expanding the Uptown Artway. And the budget estimate for those activities is about $5.8 million. The next one is Creekside Pride, which consists of building a man-made recreational lake or pond, enhancing the existing green space near Indian Creek with trails and amenities like community gardens, and then providing educational opportunities about the ecosystem. And the estimated budget for that project is pretty big. It's $22.3 million, and that varies a lot depending on if you go lake or pond, and if you have to do property acquisitions. All of that was taken into account when we were putting our budgets together. It's the Little Things is the third one, and this is more kind of policy-based. This consists of developing a community alert system. Hopefully it'll be a text alert system for upcoming events and to get information into residents' hands. It's an expansion of curbside recycling. So there was a big interest in recycling. Having Marion fireworks on the 4th of July was a big request. And then expanding the existing open container area in Uptown Marion, so creating an entertainment district. And then installing informational kiosks or welcome centers in high traffic areas. And the estimated budget for that is almost $1.4 million. And these are all detailed out in your vision plan packets. Just Keep Swimming is pretty self-explanatory. It's developing a master aquatics plan for the city of Marion. So taking all of the pools and water activities that we have in this community, including the splash pads, our new YMCA, the Linmar Pool, an aquatic center, and then our existing outdoor pool, and then looking to the future and figuring out where our needs are. So the ImagineX budget total is $43.6 million, and we've outlined some of our potential funding sources there. Lots of grants. Iowa Great Places, hopefully we'll find out. We applied in May for a redesignation of Iowa Great Places, and we will find out at the end of July if we in fact got that. And then the grants, we can start applying for grants immediately after we find out. We would look to CAT grants, Community Attraction and Tourism grants, Art Place America again, most likely for the second phase of Uptown Artway. There's a great grant known as Bloomberg Philanthropies. It's a national grant. We're in the process of applying to Our Town, which is through the National Endowment for the Arts. We would anticipate that the city would participate in paying for some of these projects. There's an organization known as Nature Conservancy that we would look to help with the Creekside Pride initiative, Hall Prine Foundation, and then a lot of private fundraising as well. So in terms of what's next, as I said, we're waiting for the Great Places announcement that will come at the end of July. We're starting to do a lot of grant writing, and then our committee work, so each one of those 4 initiatives will have its own committee. That work will launch in September. It's really crazy event season for the chamber right now, and lots of families are out doing vacations, and so we figured the ideal time to launch the committees would be in the fall. Any questions?
Well, first, I want to say thank you to the Chamber for taking the lead on these, both of the Imaginate and ImagineNext initiatives. When you see that $40 million invested from the Imaginate process, I think you said you consider it a success. It's definitely a great success, and there are things that may not have happened without somebody taking that on and to take the lead and to see these things through. So it's a great way to for the chamber and the city to partner together, collaborate, and as we've shown in the past, through collaboration we get a lot done for our community. So thank you for taking that on and for doing it again with ImagineNext.
Absolutely.
Any questions for Jill on these?
I do. So how does the process work in terms of, you'll have 4 separate committees, how these 4 get prioritized? Is it based on money that's dog-eared from certain grants towards certain ones, or how does that process work based on what you did the last time?
I think, definitely that's part of it, like what grants are out there that we can go after and the timing of those grants, but then also we'll be taking a lot of cues from the city, looking at the CIP, because I think you guys are going to be doing some prioritizing with that. When we did Imaginate, it was like a 10-year timeline, and we've been talking about this one. I think this is probably more of a 12 to 15-year timeline, realistically, especially with that the lake component. That is going to take maybe even longer to do, if we get to that point, to do property acquisition and those types of activities just take a long time. So, yeah, I think we'll be prioritizing them and, using them.
And so then will each of the 4 get broken into phases since
Yes.
it is over? Okay.
So you'll see in your packets that I just kind of glazed over them today during the presentation, but there are some pretty detailed steps in there. And we tried to make sure when we put the initiatives together that there were some kind of low-hanging fruit, easy wins, some intermediate wins, and then some long-term goals too. So each initiative has that built in.
Thank you.
Can you tell us how the budget numbers came about, Jill, from the standpoint on how, I'm surprised in some of these are not really a range.
Yeah.
When you talk $22 million, I'm surprised it's not a range of 17 to 25 or something. So to come up with these numbers, how they come up with, and are you looking in the future numbers or are these today's numbers?
I would say they're probably more today's numbers.
Okay.
We looked at other communities that did similar projects. We talked to city staff and putting our numbers together.
Okay.
Some of it was guesswork. Like, they're not set in stone. We didn't go out and get estimates or anything like that yet, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of what we're.
Will that be fleshed out more when the committees get to work?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. I also this is the actual full vision plan.
That looks like one of Mike's engineering binders.
7s and 7, right?
Yeah.
One of them,
I
one of them.
think the majority of this, so a lot of this is like the actual 3,000 ideas that got submitted themselves. But then also we have in the back all of the city planning documents that relate to these projects. And I think that was a really cool thing that I learned through Imaginate was that our residents are pretty tuned in to the things that the city's been studying, and the ideas that they picked really just reinforced the work that we're already doing and reaffirmed that we're working on the right things. So I thought that was a really cool takeaway.
A good observation.
So good job. Good job, city.
Well, and I think the important thing to keep in mind with these, that it's just like the Artway. That project, that investment that by the city and the donors and the grants that we applied for and everything, what that has generated in terms of other investment around it.
For sure.
We have to look at the big picture of that project being a catalyst for private sector to come in and to invest and to see the potential that's created around that project.
Right.
And I think all of these have that element to them.
Yeah, and I think, everybody should feel fortunate to live here, because in talking with other communities, they've asked us about our process and how we did it. And gosh, you're asking your residents how they want their money spent. Well, yes, we are, but not every community does that, and I think that's pretty awesome. And people are recognizing it. In fact, we were asked to serve on a panel for I think it's Tom's Planning Association. They meet in September or October in Council Bluffs. We've been asked to speak on a panel to talk through the process to try to teach and train other Iowans how to do it.
So do you have just a minute to go back to the unfinished items from Imagine 8?
Yeah.
So you said the functions and fitness is in progress.
Yep.
The
Library, book it.
that is in progress.
Yep.
The Wi-Fi is the only thing
Wi-Fi.
that's okay. And we had a discussion at the last meeting. I don't think you were
I was not there.
present
No.
about Wi-Fi in general, and whether, because there's been some work going on.
Yeah.
Or some discussion going on.
So I don't think back in 2009 we realized how important this initiative would be. I mean, now pretty much everybody has a device. But like I said, not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. And I think it's really important, and the community identified it over 10 years ago. Since then, I think Ryan Miller, is he here? There he is.
He's here.
Ryan did a lot of the groundwork with IMON to figure out how the system could work. And IMON kind of ran with it, and they've rolled it out in Cedar Rapids, they've rolled it out in Hiawatha, they've rolled it out in Iowa City. I would just really like to see us get there. They're willing to front the cost of the equipment. I know Terrell's been working with them. There are some details, like nitty-gritty type items that involve pricing per square foot of future. They want to lease it from the city, basically. So we're trying to get that agreement firmed up, I believe.
But you still see that as a community need?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, that was kind of one of the things that we were wondering about.
It's just a great community asset to be able to tout also.
Okay.
I think our questions last time on that was, how much is that need? I mean, what percentage of the people don't have it? So we were kind of looking, what are the statistics to back it up? I mean, 2009 to 2018, where are we at today?
Yeah.
What does that need really in percentage of students, for example?
Yeah, I need to go
And
back.
Schools may have some of that
I
information.
think they do have
We don't
some of
know.
that data. But I know that there are some pockets of the community that definitely don't have it. We were also working, the same time we were working with the city on the public space wireless, we were working with the schools on trying to figure out how to get students who use the free and reduced lunch program to get wireless into their home. But the privacy laws prevented them from giving out addresses and things like that, so we ran into that hiccup, and it just seemed to be too big to overcome at this point. But I think Chris Dyer has some ideas of allowing kids to opt in. So parents would sign a form that they opt in, and then it really boils down to IMON going out and putting a box basically on a light pole or a utility pole close to that home, and then that's how they get their Wi-Fi. And basically that's how it would work here too. And also, I think they had asked for some room in some of our utility boxes, but basically they put a little black box really high up on a utility pole. You don't even notice them. You can go down Cedar Rapids, they're all over their poles. But it works pretty good.
other questions while Jill's here on that, or anything else? Paul, nothing?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
You bet.
Okay. Next, we have a presentation from the Marion Police Department.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We're just going to take about 10 minutes. I'll introduce you to Officer Nick Martins from my Detective Bureau. He's one of our crisis intervention team officers. He'll give you a brief overview of a new process and new procedure we have in place over the last couple of years to deal with individuals that may be in a state of crisis through mental illness or some other malady that when police interact with them, confrontations can often occur, and law enforcement typically hadn't had advanced training on understanding issues that can affect people, whether it be a narcotic that is prescribed to this person that they're not, adhering to, or just a psychological condition, to make officers more aware so we can de-escalate, be aware of the factors that are affecting individuals in our community when a police response does occur, to help prevent lethal force situations, and really to give us another tool other than handcuffs to deal with the individuals in our community, to give them the help that they truly need. If we take them to jail, what's that do? It just gets them out and it puts them in a cycle. And it's a process that try to get some help. And so, Nick Martins.
Hi, welcome.
Good afternoon, Council, Mayor. Like Chief McHale said, the crisis intervention team is kind of a newer thing in Marion. We just started in April of 2017 is when we went to our first class, but it's been around for quite a bit. It's often called CIT just because that's a lot easier than saying crisis intervention team all the time. And it kind of refers to a collaborative effort between law enforcement and mental health. There's always kind of been that stigma with people. Mental health, it's a big deal. The way that we used to handle this, just as a country, was to put people in asylums, lock them up, get them out of the community. Well, now they're realizing that doesn't work. We want these people, we want to try and heal them, we want to get them back in the community. The only issue with that, like in the state of Iowa, they're closing all the centers, the Abbey Center closed, so these people are being released into the community. Well, they don't have that support system. Some of their family has just abandoned them, or they don't know how to care for themselves. So law enforcement is seeing them more and more. Now with law enforcement going through this kind of training, before, like when I went through the academy, you get on the street, you deal with someone who's going through a mental health crisis, you take them to the hospital and leave them there. We could do nothing for them. So this is kind of giving us access to a little more resources and kind of not really being a psychiatrist, but knowing when something's not working. Then we want to raise awareness that mental health it's not a crime. So if someone is taken something or they're prescribed something and it alters their mood or their mind, that's not necessarily a crime. We want to learn to help them and learn to at least recognize that there's a problem. So just a brief history on how CIT got started. It kind of all started in Memphis, and like a lot of things in law enforcement, there was a crisis that occurred, and then we changed our tactics to adapt to that. So in September of 1987, the Memphis Police Department was called out to an address to deal with Joseph Robinson. Mr. Robinson was well known to the police. They dealt with him frequently. They knew that he had mental health issues. When they were called, Robinson was trying to cut his throat, acting like he was on drugs. So the police responded, and they did what they were trained to do. So they didn't have mental health training. And unfortunately, they were not able to de-escalate that situation and ended up shooting and killing Mr. Robinson. So after that, Memphis looked at their policies and their procedures. Before that incident, Memphis police ended up killing 7 people per year. That was the average that they shot and killed. All of those shootings were found to be within their policy, but they got to looking at it and thinking, maybe there's something we can do differently to maybe change this. So after that, in more like 1988, they did that, and in the 11 years after they started the program, there was 2 people killed by Memphis police. So it works. When I first went to the training, I was very, very skeptical, just because it's so different than what we're taught. Like in the academy, we're not here to be super nice to everybody all the time. Well, this stuff works. You can't always just use brute force on people. So the Memphis model is kind of what it's called, is the first CIT program, where they like to train at least 25% of the patrol officers. So you have a fourth-year patrol officers that can go out there and they can respond to these incidents. So right now on the street, if there's a mental health call, the CIT officers that are working know that, dispatch knows that, so they try and send those officers so they can help handle the call. It emphasizes, like the chief was saying, diversion before arrest. Because these people, if we take them to jail, a lot of times it's because they want to fight with us. And if they want to fight with us, either we're going to get hurt or they're going to get hurt. And then they're out the next day doing the same thing. Nothing has been solved other than, they go to jail for the night. It doesn't really do anything. So what Memphis and then San Antonio police have also started doing is, rather than have like a jail, they have kind of a mental health center that they've started to make, where it's kind of it's a diversion facility, more or less. So they have community-based services, they have resources, things that can get these people some help before taking them to jail. Not saying we want to try this with everybody, because I always tell people when I show up, I don't want to take you to jail, but if you punch me in the face, then I don't really have an option. So this type of stuff is not for everything, but it does work when it's used. But how we started, local agencies, mainly like Johnson County, Linn County Sheriff's Office, went down to San Antonio, learned about their CIT program, and then they brought that back here. And Johnson County Sheriff's, there was a woman that worked with them as just jail diversion. That was her whole job, is to figure out how to get people out of jail. So we went down to Johnson County, and they trained us. Fantastic training. They brought in actors, and they kind of role-played these situations. You have to sit there and talk with them for about 20 minutes. It's pretty awkward, but it's very good training. And then when I actually got back on the street, my first call I went to someone, they're freaking out, pacing back and forth. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've seen this before. So it's fantastic training, and it just kind of gives us another tool to help us work. So the goals of the training, number one, with everything we do, officer safety. We want to know how to talk to this person, solve this problem, or get them some help while still remaining safe. Number two, citizen safety. So like I said before, if we have to go hands-on with someone, we don't really have the option of losing. So if someone wants to fight, either they're going to get hurt or we're going to get hurt. And it's more paperwork, which we don't really like to do. And then three, obviously improved police services to community. We don't want the community looking at us as just stormtroopers that are out there to throw people in jail, because that's not our job. That's not what we want to do. The benefits to law enforcement: decreased injuries. We don't have to hurt people because they don't have to fight us. Decrease in use of force. If we can talk someone down, get them access to help that they didn't have before, we don't have to go hands-on. We don't have to do anything with them. Decrease repeat calls for service. There's a lot of times where we have calls for service where it's the same person, and before we didn't have the resources or the knowledge to help this person. So we know that there's something wrong with them mentally, but there's nothing we can do about it. So we just keep going back and going back and going back. We can improve use of alternatives. So jail is not the only alternative. At jail, honestly, it doesn't do a whole lot. There's people that deserve to be there, but a lot of times, people, they may not. And then we improve the relationships between the officers and the community. Because, we don't want people thinking that we're just out there to throw everyone in jail. Benefits to health providers, so the hospitals. When we take someone down to the hospital, a lot of times it's the ER doctor that, they're not specialized as much. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're just there to triage people, get them out of the ER, get them follow-up appointments, which it doesn't do a whole lot for the people, and then it clogs the ER, which is usually, if I had to take someone to jail or down to the hospital right now, I'd be getting back about 9 o'clock. So it's very, very, very time-consuming. We can get earlier intervention with people. So if you have someone that, maybe they don't want to talk about a mental health issue that they're going through, well, if we can try and get them to talk, we can get them help earlier. Because if they don't want to admit or talk about a problem, then there's really nothing we can do. And then it kind of bubbles up, and then it's a terrible outcome a lot of times. Improve relationships with the doctors. So we haven't always had the best relationship, talking to them, sharing stuff, but with this, we can help them, we can give them the information they need, and then give people better access to help. And then the person that's in crisis, again, they're not injured. They are becoming more aware with law enforcement, so they're more familiar with us. They realize that we're not there just to ruin their day. We're trying to help them. We can try and get a little more jail diversion, get them access to that care. In the state of Iowa, they're one of the worst when it comes to mental health care, so there's not a lot of resources out there, but the few resources we have, we can push out to these people. And a lot of times it's stuff that they don't know about, because if they go to the ER, then they say, well, schedule an appointment with your neurologist, which is 2 months away. So why should we invest in this? We are trying to give officers just a very basic understanding of crisis intervention skills to take a situation that is very volatile and try and settle it down a little bit. Going to this training, we're not going to be doctors, but even as cops, I use firearms as an example. You don't have to be a firearms instructor. If I took my gun apart right now, I could not name every single little piece that's in there, but when I pull the trigger and it doesn't go bang, I know something's wrong, and that's kind of what this training does. It shows you, hey, I don't know what's happening up there, but I know something's not right. We need to get this person some help. But then also it gives officers a better understanding of mental illness. We can deal with more people who are in crisis by giving officers information, because a lot of times there's that stigma. That's just, that person's crazy. We go to that house all the time. We don't really care about them, kind of thing. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that these people are getting the appropriate care, and then also that they know about the resources and how to access them. So just some facts here, some quick ones. 18% of Americans will experience a mental illness at some point in their lives, and that's throughout everybody. Compare that with 50% among people who are incarcerated. So we're seeing a very disturbing trend that people who are incarcerated are suffering from mental illness more and more. Adults in the United States with a mental disorder in any year, you can see the numbers up there. Anxiety disorder, 19%. Only 41% of people with a mental illness use mental health services in any given year. And that's 10% for substance abuse disorders, which is drug addictions. Now, more recently, they've started classifying drug addiction as a mental illness. So that's all a big cluster. But the one thing that struck me at this class is a third of the people with a severe mental illness will have contact with law enforcement before ever seeing a doctor. So a lot of times people, they're not going to the doctor. We are finding them. And so we have to know how to deal with them. So, and then this is just a quote from Winston Churchill that, we know that we need to change things. We're trying to do that. And we're trying to get better so we can provide better access to these resources. Any questions?
Thank you. So you said that the goal is to have a fourth of the officers trained?
That's just the Memphis model.
Okay. Do we have that here, or
I think we have more than that.
I think we're at 50%, right, of our patrol officers. We have 14 trained, and then over the next year and a half, we're going to get all of our patrol officers trained.
Say all.
Right now there's, I think there's just one class or two classes, and we're sending 4 people at a time through them, so
okay.
in the next year
So that's already a program we're implementing. You're not looking for additional funding from us or anything like that to
Nope,
to
it's
do
all
this?
free, and we're stealing everything we possibly can to make one of our model match.
It is free training?
Yep.
Wow.
Doesn't cost us a cent. Other than staff time and
Sure.
and getting our personnel to the training, yeah.
Transportation.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what are your statistics, Nick, on how many times a year officers need and benefit from having this CIT?
every day. I did not realize how many times we would use this training. Like I said, when I went to it, I thought it was just going to be one of these trainings where it's all, hey, let's give everybody a hug, that'll solve everything. But it changed my mind, and it shocked me how many times I ran into people who may have been going through a crisis, which crisis can be anything. For me, it's when the Hawkeyes blow a 14-point lead in the fourth quarter. Someone else, they lost their job. Someone else, it's divorce. It could be anything. And so you never realize how often you would need it until you go through the training. But I was using it every single day.
Training include, it's a fine line. Domestic disputes is your most dangerous call. And there's a fine line there of studying what you're studying and have a person who's just got a gun and going to get you. I mean, how do you?
Yeah, for that, obviously, each situation will kind of dictate what we do. So normally, like before this training, when you go talk to someone, I would never sit down next to them. That's kind of one of the first things they teach you. But in this class, as long as the person is, if they're up swinging their arms around, or if they have a bat or something, I'm not going anywhere near them. But if they're calm, it's amazing how much just sitting down next to a person will calm them down and relax them. A lot of times if you have someone standing over you, then that's kind of a position of authority, which it's a good position if they try and attack you, but when I'm trying to help you or get you to listen to me, then it's not so great. So just sitting down with them, talking to them, but obviously then, if I'm talking to you, I got one of my buddies over here that if something happens, they're ready to respond.
And that's why the safety of the officer would be my concern.
Yep. So that's the number one priority in pretty much anything that we do.
And that's an important change that we've made in the last couple of years in how many officers we send to certain types of calls and the amount of time that it will take, a contact cover theory for our department, and the amount of officers it takes to handle these types of calls. So,
I have a quick question. Oh, did you want to go?
I was reading about in Johnson County, the supervisors were voting on building a new mental health facility to take people to instead of a hospital. Is there something like that here in Lynn County now? We don't have anything like that?
So Johnson County had a woman that she did, her job was jail diversion. In Lynn County, jail diversion is self-supervised probation. So it basically doesn't exist. We don't have anything like that. I know Johnson County, they're pretty progressive when it comes to the CIT. They're looking at building this facility. I don't know if we'd have access to it. I know it was discussed, but that was back, a year and a half ago when they were still planning it.
Yeah, and my question was related to that, and maybe it's more for the chief, but just from a political and legislative, are we leaning on the state with, we're training our officers as a community to respond to this, but they need to fulfill their end of the bargain and have a go-to point. So do we give them these stats or tell them what we're doing in terms of what we're doing and what we need? Because, like you're saying, they've been closing down. We're one of the worst in the country.
Sure. I know the Iowa Police Chiefs Association has a platform where they educate our legislators and the individuals that can influence policy, and I'm not sure where that's at and what type of message. This program is being adopted all across the United States, but it's very good talking points, and I'll make sure that I take your concerns back to them and let them know.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Good.
Nothing is starred on the finance or public services sections. Anybody have questions on any of those items? Oh, nothing? Okay. Under police and fire, we have one item starred. Discussion regarding fireworks ordinance. Is that Chief Crable or Chief
I think
McHale?
I'll go first, and then I'll defer to the chief. Would that be okay?
That would be fine.
Okay.
Council was provided, and city staff was provided just a little packet from the police department, but in summary, in 2018, we responded to 290 calls for service from June 1st through July 5th, 2018. We made 23 arrests. We did make a concerted, proactive effort on overtime to try to impact those utilizing fireworks illegally, which resulted us in doubling our fireworks-related arrests from 12 in 2017 to 23 in 2018. Significant staff time was spent dealing with phone call complaints, social media complaints, people getting stopped, hey, I don't like the fireworks. I did a rough estimate on an average of 15 minutes to respond to a call and an hour to handle an arrest. And the figure that I come up with staff time and then the staff time in records that we dedicated to handling fireworks calls this year was 130 hours. And one of my staff has made a recommendation to council that they to possibly consider a tiered offense schedule for fireworks violations, so that we don't have to make a mandatory court appearance, make it more like a traffic ticket, where they could issue the ticket and the first fine's X amount, second fine's X amount, third amount is in a progressive type fine structure. What that would do is that would eliminate my officers from having to go through a booking process where they have to actually make an arrest. They don't actually take the person to jail, but the process is still there, where the paperwork that comes with the arrest still has to be completed, where we could take what would take an hour and drill it down to just a few minutes if it was treated kind of like a traffic offense type situation.
How would the fines be set?
It would be, what we would probably do is we would look at peer cities, maybe look at a model that would be maybe appropriate in structure, and then we would give a recommendation to council for them to consider.
Are there limits on what we can set for fines? I mean, can you make them really steep as a deterrent?
Your Honor, these would, even if they didn't have mandatory court appearances, these would essentially be simple misdemeanors. So I'd say it would still follow the minimums.
You'd have to fall under
maximums.
those limitations.
Yeah, minimum for, unless otherwise provided by statute, a minimum for a simple misdemeanor $65, maximum is $625. It is my understanding that Hiawatha has already adopted something similar to this, and Robbins is considering it. So it's definitely something that is going on throughout the community.
Are they setting it at the maximum fine?
I don't know exactly what Hiawatha is doing. I think Robbins is looking to adopt essentially whatever Hiawatha is doing.
Okay.
So we can set the actual fine.
Within the parameters.
Right, within the parameters,
limits.
right, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that idea to make it a lot simpler, a lot easier, just to end that situation and just result in a fine and let everybody move on. Regardless of what we decide to do, whether fireworks are legal or not in the future, you're always going to continue to have calls. So
Absolutely.
The numbers from Cedar Rapids prove that out, that looking at their statistics from 2016 to 17 to 18, and a year where they're illegal, they're legal, and then they're not legal again. So it slowed them down some in 2018, but still had more than 2016. So, you're still going to, regardless of what we ever decide to do, the situation will always be there.
I agree.
Okay.
And I think they had some injuries and fires in Cedar Rapids, from what I understand.
Yes, they did. Some
Even
serious
though,
injuries.
Yeah, even though they were illegal.
Yep.
So I think it's just, it just shows that enforcement is very hard regardless of what you do.
Yep.
There was a death somewhere, too, wasn't there?
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
So, I know we have this recommendation. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us, Chief? Or?
Consistency, I think, would be good for our community. If we figure, I would want to figure this out quickly, whether we're going to stay or we're going to go, we're going to change something, just to be fair to our citizens. As far as the police department's perspective, our capacity is there. We'll handle whatever laws or ordinances the council puts before us. Like I answered last week for Councilman Sternad, it's time that we could spend on something else. But I would tell council that I've heard from multiple people, and I've seen it all across. There's a significant portion of this community that likes them, and so we'll follow your lead and make sure that we do our best to keep the community safe.
Chief.
Well, from the fire department standpoint, I also sent out to you an executive summary of what we had done through the fireworks season. We did have 26 applications for vending sites. Only 20 of those sites were actually used. 2 were inside of buildings, fixed buildings, 2 were shipping containers, and then the other 16 were tents. And all those tents also had shipping containers that they had to maintain. The fire marshal had to actually inspect all of the shipping containers and the tents and the buildings. And as you see further, he estimated 110 hours of inspections and things that he had to do, site plans. With that, there was also administrative duties with the administrative staff in taking the complaints and then filing those, and then the investigation of those complaints. And so it was a long process, and I estimated our personnel time to be, with personnel time only, at a cost of about $6,000 to the city. The state will reimburse us $2,000. That's $100 per site that we inspect. So that's what we get back. The state stated, I talked with the state fire marshal's office. He actually stated that they did not inspect every vendor in the state this year. They just didn't have the staff. That was an option we could do also here. I didn't have to send the state fire, our fire marshal out to inspect. I could have just left it as the state fire marshal's office to come and inspect. But I had a strong feeling that it would be safer for the citizens of Marion if we were proactive and did the inspections. The state fire marshal's office did ask all the cities, if you have inspectors to take over, would you please do so? They gave a special training program, which Chief Markley attended. That's why he was our only one that could do those inspections. And I chose that we do inspect them to keep the citizens of Marion safe. I didn't want to rely on the state fire marshal's office. And in fact, the state fire marshal's office did not inspect every vendor in the state. So that's where we are. It took $6,000. What I would like to see is in the future, I've talked with Tom in planning of maybe changing the city ordinance for sales to only be in industrial areas, the same as Cedar Rapids. Cedar Rapids has contacted me, the fire chief in Cedar Rapids. He too would like to see Marion change to that. He thinks that would improve maybe some of the calls that they have in the neighboring city. Because we had so many sales sites, he feels that may have affected part of Cedar Rapids. I don't know, but I think it would be a good idea to go. I think it costs us more than what we gain. So I would like to see the zoning changes. A lot of the tents, as you know, were in large public areas, parking lots of Hy-Vee, Walmart, Menards. Those are high traffic areas. And if we would have had an incident, that would have not been good. So I just feel it would be safer if we did the same with the industrial areas. So I would like to bring something forward in the future with that to the council.
I have a question about that, just to the planning, the zoning aspect. So if we were to do that, I'm guessing they have to be a certain distance away from one another too, in case one has a firework that goes off or something. So
yes,
that would not only limit where we have them in the city, but the number of the ones that we have as well, right? That would be outlined in there?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't read the Cedar Rapids ordinance, but I mean, if it's just by zoning, there wouldn't be a distance separation unless there's a fire code on the sales.
Yeah,
right.
With the fire code, there's a property distance.
Okay.
But
okay, so that's what would determine the maximum quantity we could have, but that would whittle it down some.
yes,
Gotcha.
And what's the distance, Deb?
I would have to look at that again. It's probably.
Well, you can
50
write it into the zoning too and say you can only have them
Yes.
every 1,200 linear feet measured along the street right away.
Do we know our total sales by fireworks 2017 versus 2018? I know we had more, and I know Cedar Rapids didn't sell, so do we have any idea what the total dollars were? Did ours increase significantly because there were more sites? Because the paper seemed to indicate a lot of them were way down compared to 2017. So
The state fire marshal hasn't tallied all those yet, but when he does, I'll be sure and get that to you. But in talking with vendors, Chief Markley and myself, we've talked to some of the vendors, and they felt that sales were actually, I talked to two of them that thought the sales were down 75%.
yeah.
Is there any indication at all that the state is going to do anything? I mean, they've got to be getting same kind of meetings we're having.
The State Fire Chiefs Association and the State Fire Association are going to be lobbying again to repeal the law.
You know, we could certainly lobby our local representatives to do some repealing of the law. I don't know, maybe a shorter period or whatever.
But, I mean, if I can,
Go ahead.
I think it'd be good regardless to provide a report to the legislators, to let them know that we're, I mean, because unless they hear from the municipalities, I think that's costing us money, this is the situation, this is what we're doing in response to it. I mean, I think that would be good for them to hear and understand. I mean, that's just my thought.
We have done that. Cedar Rapids had 3 vendors this year.
Correct. And so did Hiawatha.
Yeah.
I would be in favor of looking at that zoning ordinance as well too on that industrial. I would be a huge favor of that.
You think it would naturally reduce the sales?
Yeah, I don't, and I guess in my opinion, I'm not, the state has allowed them to create the sale, and it's difficult for me to sit here and say we should infringe on them for their sales opportunities. However, in our community, I don't think we should be able to drive down through 7th Avenue and see every other block with massive tents up, selling them. We're giving the message. I seen a lot of fireworks sitting on shelves in those tents on the 5th of July as well too, so I looked at that as well too. Now, we know first year sales were going to be off the charts. We knew there was going to be a reduction because it was a one and done, and what would next year bring, so I knew there would be a lowering of sales. I'm also curious too to know that if the reports would truly reflect, because we know there's a lot of vendors that have multiple sites across the state.
Correct.
So how true will our reports be from what zip code did they sell them from? Mm-hmm. When they run their registers and do their receipts and do their books, it's going in under one filing number, and it's going to come from their corporate, wherever their filing is done. So I don't know if we're going to get a true or do they have to are they required to show their sales per?
They are supposed to show their sales, yes.
Permit, okay.
Yes.
That would be good to.
I'd want that information.
Yeah.
To me, that's important.
But I think going forward, looking at these, we have had more, I got to be honest with you, I have had more communications and more discussions this year than I did last year. And, I want people to know that you're right. We got 99% of the people like them and 1% don't. And you got to feel for those that don't. As I look at photographs and the things that those that don't. So it's a challenge. But I like the industrial portion of it. They still have the opportunity to sell. What we decide we're going to do next year, maybe that'll impact obviously the applications for permits as well too. So
it seems to me like there's support for limiting the area of sales to industrial zones. What about use? Is there any feeling or support of going to a total ban? Not you?
No.
No? Okay. What about, would we be able to limit somehow the type that is used? Like the really loud ones?
Snakes and sparklers only.
Just large sparklers.
That would be illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your Honor,
You can totally ban them, but you can't say we're only banning the really, whatever.
Can't discriminate against certain fireworks.
well, yes.
It's either all or none.
No. I mean, there is a tiered approach, and that's even I can't think of the organization, but the Fireworks Association essentially has their own national body, and they have different classifications of fireworks. And I didn't draft the statute. I believe Kara drafted it, but just in discussing with it, I believe that she used the specific classifications that the different ones that the organization has. So you can't go into a fireworks vendor and local here and purchase the big crowd pleasers. You can purchase some pretty big ones, but you can't
I'm
purchase
saying
like
whatever
the
is
commercial
legal.
grade
I'm
ones.
saying whatever is legal to be sold.
Yeah.
In those, right now, whatever is legal to be sold in this state, can you say only this class can be used? And because you can ban use, so can you say this class is legal for use and a certain class is not legal for use? Why can't you do that?
I mean, that's something I would want to take a deeper look at and just shoot from the hip, because, I mean, I get your point, and it does seem like, well, if I can ban all of them, why can't I ban some of them? And I guess my first response to that's going to be, I think the legislature is probably going to take care of that problem for us, because I think they're even
Okay,
going.
but I don't.
But as the law
I'm not
stands
holding
now,
much hope for the legislature,
Right,
to be
but-
honest.
but as the
Because
law
they, you
stands,
know.
okay, go ahead, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Okay. But as the law stands now, my inclination is the way that litigation seems to be going on this is that if you aren't going to allow a ban, if you aren't going to follow a complete ban, then you need to allow essentially everything that's allowable to purchase, you need to allow to be set off.
Because they all fall into the same class.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
That's the problem.
That you can't cherry pick.
Because I think, the most of the complaints I've been hearing are, just the really loud ones that
Yeah,
sound like a
the
bomb
really
going
loud
off
ones-
outside your
Ones
window.
that shoot in the air. That's
Yeah.
it.
The really loud ones
Colorful ones
actually
are
fall
okay.
into the same class as the quieter ones.
Yeah,
That's
and-
the problem.
and
It's
as
it's all
Mr.
one class.
Mr. Brandt kind of pointed this out, this issue hasn't come up so much in terms of the decibel issue, but it has come up in terms of, well, can we ban ones that are, that are projectile and just allow ground effect ones? And it seems to be, no, we can't.
It seems to be, or it is.
Well,
Because can we do it and then see what happens?
we can always do that. The problem with that is then we become the test case, and that becomes very expensive. The cases that are going through now, I haven't exhaustively seen what the Iowa Supreme Court has said, but the Iowa Court of Appeals, who's not the final word, is saying, no, I don't think we can do that. So we're not saying I don't think we can. They're saying, no, if you are allowing it, you're allowing this class. So as the chief is saying, if you're allowing this class, everything within the class is allowable. So
That's really odd.
Don't we have a noise ordinance?
But
Yes, sir, we do have a noise ordinance. However, it's incredibly difficult to enforce. And a question I would
You
have.
can't measure it.
I'm sorry?
You can't measure it.
It's difficult to measure.
Yeah.
You have to measure it from the offender's property line closest to the sound source.
But no, what I was thinking in my own mind is that we could go to where they're selling them and sorry, we want to test this, and this. If it's too loud, say, I'm sorry, it violates our noise ordinance.
Well, the loudness would depend upon where it's being set off, as far as ricocheting and other sources, things that we can't control. A problem with enforcing and even going after a noise ordinance or ban for fireworks, we're cops. We get there, and if it offends someone, is that enough to cite the person? Is it decibel level? We're going to have to get that up pretty quick and make sure it's calibrated and go forward from there. As if you want to go to the vendors and set them off and test them,
Yeah.
there's a lot of variables. As far as if I put one off in at the Bentley Drive where there's a lot of apartments around and the sound ricochets, it could sound louder than if I put it off north of 35th Avenue in an area that's not been developed.
Some of them you would know at the vendor they're too loud.
You're sure. Yeah, there's going to be some obvious ones.
Yeah.
But
we wouldn't be able to ban them, though. The ones that were too
Why
loud.
not?
You can't ban the sale.
They'd be against the ordinance.
Sale-wise,
Say,
we
I'm
could.
sorry, you can't sell them.
We can't do that.
No, you can't.
We can't ban the sale of them, though.
no.
Because of the state.
Okay.
That
Wow.
that would be
Splitting
akin to
hairs.
saying we're going to ban this car stereo because you're capable of turning it up loud enough that it would somehow violate the noise ordinance. Just because prospectively it's capable of doing that, you can't
I think-
you can't
yeah.
approach it that way.
We have to be reasonable in what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's got to be enforceable.
And it's got to be, yeah.
Are there any sorry, are there any, so there are no cities that have tried to ban the use of ones that shoot in the air? There's no litigation about that right now?
I believe there has been. I would have to go back and look at that. Honestly, Kara's kind of the fireworks expert. I could try and, if she's available, I can actually try and shoot her a message and see if I can get an answer while we're still here tonight.
Well,
We're
we
not
don't,
gonna make a
this doesn't
decision.
have
Doesn't
to,
have to
yeah,
change tonight.
we're not done talking
Okay.
about this.
But
So, I mean,
if
but
we can report
I
back.
think we need more of the information on those things.
I would love to see a ban on stuff that shoots in the air if we can do it, because I think that's what causes the pictures that you get and stuff is from the fallout. The stuff that's hitting cars and
It's
How
the
far
really
it
loud
shoots out.
noise and
It's
the
how far.
debris in people's yards. I stick to what I said when we talked about this last year, is that I just think it's impossible, even if it's perfectly within the rules, it's impossible to use these in an urban setting without impacting your neighbor. It's just not possible. You're impacting your neighbor, whether it's with the loud noise or with the debris or the risk of fire or injury or whatever it is. Are we able to dictate only a certain spot where they can be used? Because people have asked me that too. Why don't you designate a place out, in Lau Park or wherever, somewhere where everybody can go and use their fireworks there?
Well, we already are. We already have designated certain places that they can, or more specifically where they can't. And I think as a city, we probably don't want them going
Okay.
out to Lau Park. And
Well,
and
I'm
letting
just
them
bringing
out.
that up because that's been some of
Yeah.
the suggestions. People are trying to be, in my experience this year, people have been, appreciative of the efforts we've made so far. They're trying to give more, be constructive in their criticism and to give ideas on what more can be done. I think they understand that we've been put in this position by the legislature and that it's a difficult position. But I don't agree that 99% of people like them. I think maybe 99% either like or tolerate them or are willing to be tolerant. I think it's a small percentage that like them personally, that are out there doing them. If you were to have the total number, I think it's a small percentage of the population. But the rest of the people will tolerate them and they're okay with them. That doesn't mean that they'll be upset with you if you ban the use.
My poll was a 20% plus or negative on that, so. Can I follow up on a comment?
Sure.
Before we leave the
Go ahead.
subject? Chief, I wanted to say also, and I would also ask the PD, please don't let up on that. Continue to enforce those. I would, in my opinion, would say, even though if the state is not doing that, we need to do that at a local level, because I think we do see huge rewards out of that. I know there was some citations issued on some of our inspections on the 24-hour shift out there of the evenings and how they're supposed to man those tents and so forth. So I would ask that we don't let up on that. I think that's a critical component for our city. So,
Well-
and then and just with that, I also want to say thank you as well too, because both of those departments put a lot of extra labor in there that's not slated every year for this particular topic. So a lot of schedules are being altered for this. So we appreciate that.
I also would like to give a big kudos to Fire Marshal Wade Markley. He actually put how many times he had to go back and go back and go back, and it was 3 to 5 times to each site. He'd tell them there's a violation, and they'd try to correct it. And then he'd drive by 2 days later and see that they went back to the violation. So he'd stop again and try to eliminate that violation. And if you go by odds, I think by his going back as many times as he did, decreased the odds of something bad happening. Because what I sent you, if you look at some of the violations, exposed fuses on the fireworks, those would be packaged. I mean, if someone would have walked by just with a lighter as a joke, it could have been a bad thing. So I think by doing the inspections that were done, we maybe stopped something from happening. So I want to give him a big kudos.
I think also too, if we moved it to a zoning ordinance of industrial, it makes that footprint smaller for us. It's a lot less traffic that that covers a lot of the city when our departments, when they gotta travel 2 or 3 miles to get to that location, and PD as well too. It just brings everything into a general area that makes everything a lot easier to patrol and police and inspect and everything, so.
And I would like to comment too about a general place to fire off fireworks. I really wouldn't want to do that because you're putting a lot of people in a space where you have an unpredictable product that could cause problems. You're putting more people into the dangerous zone. So, whereas when they're in their own backyards, you've got a few people. So I would be against that. So thank you.
Well, I think as well too. Then we put the total impact on the residents that are in that particular area, and I don't think that's fair either. So.
As far as the police department, a benefit would be a scheduled violation.
Okay.
I understand the tiered effect if you get 1 or 2 or 3 citations, but you can't consider that until after conviction. And so within one season, you're always going to have 1 violation until after conviction. I think I've heard of the number $650 thrown around. That's the maximum you can do under state code for a simple misdemeanor. Officers don't like to push paper, and if you only have to push a citation, get a signature, and move on to the next one, it'd be a lot more. The officers would write the citations a lot quicker versus doing an entire incident report.
I like both the suggestions, that Chief came up with as far as changing the zoning. So Randy, I think, is correct on the smaller footprint. That's obviously going to mean fewer tents. And then the police department recommending how we handle the citation as well. So I think both of those are excellent suggestions to help make this better in the future.
And I would say it's not just the pets that are getting scared.
Yes.
We had a neighbor who I think spent a lot of money on fireworks, and there were no geese in our pond for for 2 weeks after. They've just returned.
You got a lot of geese.
That's good, though.
Yeah.
So I think all animals are scared, besides the people, the impact on people. So
I have another question for Chief Crable.
Shoot the geese.
So you said he had to go back multiple times to these tents. Is there
Yes.
a point where you can shut them down for the violations?
No. They
You
have
can't shut 'em
30
down
days. They have 30 days to appeal. Then you can shut them down.
then they're done.
So the season's
Time's
over in
up,
30
yeah.
days. Exactly. That's
So
the way the
that's-
law was written.
But that's the point in the white paper conversation, that's the stuff the legislators need to know. Hey, if they get 3 violations, no go, you're done. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the kind of stuff that I think if we look at the law and understand what they're saying and point out the problems, because personally, I'm fine with fireworks being lit off, on the 4th. I think it's great, whatever. But it's the fact that they tie our hands with it so structurally, and I don't think they maybe even get it, because no one's telling the legislators the tweaks and problems with it. So that's why I think that's important.
The mayor's right. Will and I were at the farmer's market. The guy comes up and said, "You did the right thing." Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you don't hear from the people who think they're all right. You hear from the people who are displeased with them.
Yeah, he was happy with.
He was happy with them.
So what's,
Lorraine had
well, I just wanted to find out what our next steps are, because Chief McHale had mentioned consistency and doing something quick, but we've requested information to make decisions, and it sounds like, so what is the next step for us to decide
I think
next
I think we'll hear back from the city attorney on what are the possibilities. We'll probably have proposed
Yes.
ordinance changes from the staff to consider.
And the police department would like
The 2 different
permission
proposals.
and direction from the council to work with the city attorney to propose an edit to the ordinance
Yeah.
to provide a scheduled violation. If you give us that permission, then we'll begin.
Yeah. So then,
Both of those on the next agenda.
Yeah.
And hear back from legal for a follow-up, so we can move swiftly.
Well, we can probably hear back from legal
what's the hurry?
by Thursday.
Yeah, what's the super hurry here? I don't
Hurry.
see
We
a
have
reason we got to
January
make a
31st
decision
coming up.
today or
Right,
2
well, I
weeks.
think, in my
I mean,
opinion, though,
December 31st coming up.
Yep, in my opinion, I think what we're hearing the chief say is there's a lot of discussion. We're sitting here, we're going to talk about it, and we still do have New Year's Eve that'll be coming up next. It's August, before it comes back to us. So I don't think there's a hurry, but I think, is there any reason for delay on what we've talked about so far?
Those two
We're not
pieces?
talking about changing
Keep
the
it moving.
fireworks ordinance.
Yeah.
We're just talking about,
Oh, I'm fine with those two
Yeah.
pieces.
Yeah.
I'm just answering the question. The question was, is why are we in a hurry?
Just from the perspective of a zoning change, because it is part of the zoning code, that has to go to P and Z, and then it's 3 readings, so I
Right. Take a couple months.
probably want to keep it rolling.
That's fine. Blue?
Well, let's see, what's that?
Is the blue industrial?
Blue's, the gray.
The gray, I'm sorry, thank you.
Pretty limited.
That's pretty much it.
You,
Right by the PD.
there you go.
Yeah.
Maybe you can let them set up in your parking lot.
Okay,
Well planned.
other discussion?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor,
Yes, ma'am.
the next item on the list is not starred, but it was a late entry. This is an annual payment that we have for our alarm systems. When we get a 911 call, it's the alert system that comes off in the stations. So it's an annual fee. I just wanted to clarify that. And it is budgeted for, so.
Okay, thank you. Questions on that for Chief? Okay, on to engineering.
All right, the first one is just a bunch of payments under E1, unless there's any questions on those. E2, we did receive a letter requesting stop signs at the intersection of West 34th Avenue and Hawthorne Street. So what we're recommending is to receive and file and refer to TAC for a staff report back. I do have the location up on the screen. Basically, it's a two-way stop for West 34th Avenue, and then it goes into Gill Park.
So there's nothing there now?
There's stop control for north-south. There's a stop sign here and there's a stop sign there, but they're asking to make it a 4-way stop.
Okay.
E3, if you notice, it was actually on the last council agenda, but it was pulled for some legal reasons that has since been tweaked. Basically, as part of our Grantwood Trail extension between 31st and 35th, we actually built wetlands. And so that's kind of what's shown in here, if you can see on the screen. And basically, the area that's east of 35th that we're doing with Rachi, there are some wetlands that we had to mitigate behind Marion Iron. And so rather than pay to have them in a wetland bank, we actually built them ourselves. They are pretty pricey. We had to do a 1.5-to-1 ratio. And as part of that, the Corps requires us that we monitor them for 5 years. So each year we have someone go out there, inspect the species to make sure that they're coming up and the right species are coming up. You don't have the reed grass taking over. So all this is the actual monitoring and the reporting that has to be done then to submit to the Corps. So it's a 5-year contract with EB Solutions, so it's $1,680 annually. So he'll take care of it for the 5 years. And then if there's plantings that have to be removed or replaced, then that's a separate contract that we can then get contract for to take care of that stuff. But this at least gets us the report and lets us know how we're doing. The last time we did this was for the 29th Avenue Bridge, and that was a little more expensive. That was about $3,000, but it was also a bigger area.
So that's about $85,000 over 5 years, is that right?
Yeah, the total is $8,400
Per year or
total.
total contract?
It's
Yep. So it's
1,680 a year.
$1,680 annually.
Okay.
The staff, we just don't have the staff that's trained in wetlands. That's why we can't do it in-house.
And it's budgeted, I
Yeah,
assume?
it's part of the big budget of the project.
Yep. Okay. Questions on that? Number 4?
Item 4, so every once in a while we do make a mistake. When we were pulling quantities out of the Northview project, there was a 393 lineal foot of pipe that was not pulled. when we pulled the final quantities, and so that's a $21,615 change order to add that, so it's just the unit price that they bid. The water department is paying for this water main, and they do have it in their budget to take care of this as part of their contingency.
Can you talk a little bit more, Mike, about that entire project for Northview? I was just over there right next to it yesterday, talking to some people, and their comment was it seems to be moving very slow. They still haven't touched the street yet. I mean, so from their perspective, it looks like it's really going at turtle's pace. So is it moving on schedule, and then much longer will that street construction take? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, so a lot of what they've only done so far is the water main work, and with that way people have access. We left the street there and then rock back those portions. Two big factors that we have in all construction projects are utilities and weather. So unfortunately, all the rain that we got slowed us down, and then CenturyLink was also on our way. Any of our franchise communications, Alliant, Mid-America, we have monthly meetings with them to try and get them out of our way. Sometimes they forget where they have utilities, and then we find them for them. Ryan's project that he just did, where the new parking lot behind the dental, he found all kinds of utilities in the alleyway. Utilities are a constant problem. And so in this case, they actually identified a bunch of utilities that were in the way that they thought were not in the way. And it just takes time then to get a crew out there to get those facilities moved. Unfortunately, we can't just cut through them and move on. We have to wait for them to move.
So at this point, is there any estimate on when this might get completed, or?
It'll still be completed this construction season. I don't have the working days in front of me right now, but all the city projects that we let internally typically have a working day, so they have so many days to complete the project. When it's out of their control, like the utilities, we don't charge them for those days.
Okay.
And at least in that case, everyone had access to their properties. But it's unfortunate when that happens.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I'd ask you the same thing, Mike. You might expand on the fact that concrete guys are buried trying to get things done, and
yeah, we do have a few projects.
We've got halfway things done all over town.
We have a few projects that are rocked, ready to pave, and there's no paving contractor. So unfortunately, in Iowa, we're limited on the number of concrete companies we have. For example, when we do an HMA project, it's only one company, LL Pelling, who's owned by Manats, that does those projects. For concrete, we have Citywide, ENF, and then Eastern Iowa that do area stuff in here. We have started to have Metro do a little bit. They actually paved Armour. That's the first project that they've done for Marion since I've been here. But when you have rains like you did the past few weeks, they have other projects that were rocked and ready to go, and they couldn't pave on those either because it was raining. And so that delays that project, and so they got to finish that project before they move all their equipment and come to this project. So that's probably why you've gotten some of those calls on Lucor or Central Corridor, where are the pavers?
15th Street, yeah.
Mike, why don't we have Kings or Kroll, or do they not bid?
They supply concrete, they do not place it.
Right.
Gotcha.
Good question. Okay.
If you open a concrete business, you might make some money. There's plenty of work out there.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they can't find the workers either.
Yeah.
That whole industry, I've
It's
talked to different people,
backbreaking.
they are short of workers just like a lot of other trades.
E5 is a TSIP application. So this is proposed improvements at 62nd and Highway 151. So you can see on the monitor we're proposing a signal and then turn lanes. Last year, as part of this development for Hennessy and 13, we did get $500,000 for the TSIP application. So we're basically trying again. This one we may not get the money this time just because the ratio for the traffic funds isn't as high as it was for the last application. There hasn't been as many accidents here, which is good for us, but bad for the application. But we need authorization to proceed with that application.
Yeah.
Okay, questions on that? Everybody understand it? All right. Community development. Tom? All right. Are you starting with number 4, Tom?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm turning over the gavel to Mayor Pro Tem on this.
So item number 4 is preliminary plat for the Marion Aircom Park out by the Marion Airport. There's a pretty lengthy staff report regarding this, and I think, the preliminary plat's been talked about a couple times as we went through the rezoning. I don't know if there are any specific questions, but this is providing for basically industrial development east of the airport. The Oasis volleyball courts are out there. There's a rock road currently. The property's not being proposed to be final platted, so that rock road can exist until such time there's a final plat, and then we would need either surety posted or the improvements made. The concept is they wanted to let that place get open, and then ultimately make the improvements probably in the fall or spring, and then next year come back with a final plat that would be consistent with the preliminary. There was a waiver request within the preliminary plat, and that was for the length of a street without a connection, east-west connection or north-south connection. And I would say there is a letter included in the packet, and really it outlines it perfectly. In an industrial area, there aren't as many connections necessary, but additionally, you're trying to create cross streets where there's an airport runway, so it's just becomes very difficult. So staff is supportive of that extension through the request for the waiver of that particular provision. I'd point out that sanitary sewer to the area will be served from the south, and it'll likely be some time before that infrastructure is in place. But with the development going on the north side, they wanted to get the property platted, zoned, and developed. So, are there any specific questions on that as we walk through? You'll notice that there's also a plat of survey number 2274, number 5. Oh, it's not starred, but this is to transfer a portion of that property from one entity to another to allow so there's not a final plat being presented, but it puts it in the hands out of Luxair into one corporation into another. Just so you're aware, there will be a transfer of property. As we talk about a lot, we don't really like to use plats of surveys unless we have a preliminary plat, and the plat of survey is consistent with the property lines of the preliminary plat. So,
Anyone? No? Okay. Number 7.
Okay, so I'm taking the gavel back. I do have a question on number 6, Tom. What is the amendment?
So the trails plan, and I'll say Kesha has been really good about this, is keeping that plan up to date. So there were some trails alignments on the north side of town, like north of Echo Hill out to County Home. There was an alignment that wasn't placed on there, but it was a collector. I think, Mike, you had mentioned that was one that needed to be, or engineering had identified it as not being consistent. So that's an addition, and then we wanted to reflect the safe routes to schools, planning documents, and the grant we received into that. So it's just miscellaneous trail projects throughout the community. But we like to kind of do an annual review of those plans and make sure that we're consistent and have everything accounted for.
Thanks. Number 7?
Number 7 is a request to proceed with a resolution of necessity for improvements related to Lot 1 REC Second Edition. So this is the property north of Involta, south of the First United Methodist Church's new location. So Highway 13, REC Drive, Involta, the new church site. Actually, it's the full quarter section north of REC Drive, and Berger's got his development out there on the corner, but the church is in now. Some time ago, I think about a year ago or so, when the church acquired and wanted to start building, they had to final plat the property. And you remember at that time we had a conversation about public improvements related to the final platting of the property, similar to what we just talked about with that Aircom Park. We either have to have surety placed or letters of credit in place to ensure that the public improvements associated with any final plat are going to be completed. The church at that time, they chose to do a cash payment to the city for 35th Avenue, so they basically wrote us a check for the estimated amount of the improvements. And then they did I believe, a letter of credit for this portion of REC Drive, understanding that we got to get somewhere with that, because the letter of credit's only good for a year, and then you don't want to keep doing that because there's a cost. So the church would incur a cost every year. So to backtrack, when the development went in, we did not require the full improvement of REC Drive, and it was actually deferred. When a deferral occurs, there's no surety, it's just deferred, period. So that means the city has no insurance, there's no surety for the project to move forward. However, we tie in the development agreement with the part of the final plat, the part of that deferral is that at such time the street is required to be placed, that the owner of the property has a responsibility for their appropriate share of that street, which is half the street. So we're in a situation where the church is final platting and that property's developing. We've got their letter of credit, which I think is beyond a year right now. I'm fairly certain we are outside of that year time frame. We've got REC with the deferral. From staff's perspective, it is just time that we get the road in, the improvement made. We won't have the deferral on the books anymore. The street improvement it's just finalized out. And we don't, in the years that I've been here, we don't do a lot of deferrals. And it was for economic development reasons, and Volta's a great company. We wanted to see them out there. We wanted to do what we can. But at this point in time, it's just a loose end that sits out there. The church is in a position saying, are we putting the road in, or are we not putting the road in? We're at a point now where they can put the road in, work with Volta, and it's almost like those two parties can come together. If it continued to be deferred, it'll essentially become a city project, and then any cost would be split in half and given. So then the city's fronting the dollars. So I mean, that's why staff's at this point. We want to see the road in and completed, and then it's off the books. The loose ends are over, and it's just kind of putting a bow on it after these years. So I know
there is a risk to not doing this of the cities.
Which is what? What's the risk?
Well,
having to pay
you would have to defer
Again.
the improvement from the church perspective, and then the risk is that when it needs to be put in, we would ultimately be the people that put it in, and then we would charge back to the adjacent property owners.
And we have future increased costs.
Because right now, the property owners are responsible for putting it in? I mean, not the cost, but actually having it done? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what we have is the church is in a position where they can make the improvement. I mean, unless there's a deferral, they've got to make the improvement. And then it'd be best if Involta worked with them so that they get it kind of made whole, and they have one person doing it. I mean, we're not going to allow them to go in and put half a street in, and we own the right of way. So,
I think I looked at that. I drove out there. I mean, I understand Involta's letter saying, yeah, both sides have access to their property off of REC Drive. I understand that. But I look at it from the perspective of you got both sides of this street now platted, both entities on each side of it. And I think it's time to end the deferral, make the church know that they don't have to talk about a deferral or another letter of credit and the cost for that, and just get it done. So I'd be in favor of just getting the street completed now, and as it should be.
Where's that street going?
Ultimately,
it dead ends there. So like how far is? I mean, I know it's probably hard to predict, but development of the rest of that there, where it's actually going to be serving anybody. How far away is that in the future?
It's in private ownership.
Yeah.
80 acres.
Yeah.
It's ag right now?
Yeah. It's the gap. You can see it in the map if you look.
That could change
Mike
anytime.
pointed out 80 acres.
I understand.
Yep, right there.
Yeah.
But if it's built, the city has to maintain it, right?
Mhm.
The city has to plow it.
The only other thing that Tom didn't touch on when you ask about risk is, if you tie it to the development of the property next door to the west, I mean, that property may not develop for 20 years. The risk that you have is while the church isn't necessarily likely to resell, there's always the possibility that someone else could snap up Involta. 20 years from now, we could be on our third different owner. And those things get missed in property transfers, and then all of a sudden, when it comes time to do it, you're in a fight with the new owner because the new owner claims that it wasn't disclosed during the sale process or it was something they missed during their due diligence. So there's additional risk to the community for allowing those deferrals to happen or continue to happen. We're in a situation like that right now. I don't know when we'll bring it back to you, but there's a sidewalk on 50th Street that the council renewed a deferral on about 8 years ago, that when we do our side path trails project, we're probably going to be coming back to you to have that put in, and it's a new owner on Eagle Ridge.
That's a great point.
And it's nothing against Involta. I read the letter. I understand what they're trying to, but even the time that it's taken now just processing the deferral, because it's been how many years, it's involved, two departments extensively for a few months, and so.
Is there any way to put a lien on the property for the future building of the road? That way, if it does change hands, it would be caught in the reading of the abstract?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
it's in a memorandum, so it'll be picked up in a title opinion
So,
as a
yeah,
part of that. But
so for somebody to claim that they didn't know about it, it's public record.
Yeah.
It's recorded.
We're dealing with it right now.
Yeah.
Well, my concern
still a
is,
challengeable issue, though. We
But it's a
found it.
contractual
Here it is.
thing between whoever they.
Well, that's
why would the church not want to put their portion in at today's cost?
Yeah.
And do it in the future? This makes no sense. Let's clean it up. We got too many of these in town.
But is it going to be a road that sits there and doesn't get used for 20 years, and then in 20 years we're going to have to go in and redo it because it sat there and grew weeds and
I guess that was what I was trying
broke
to
in
get at.
half? And
Ask fire about it, though.
So I think Chief Crable has something to say.
Yes, the church actually is not to the fire code. They're supposed to have a secondary exit from their site, and they can't right now because that street is not completed.
oh, really?
And so we put some limitations on them because they have not met the fire code until that second exit is provided.
So they don't have an exit or entrance on that?
No,
road
it's
right
on
now?
35th, but they have to have two due to the amount of population that they anticipate having.
Oh,
That's just rock right now coming
changes my
out
opinion.
of there, right? Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's good to know.
I mean, it's good to draw out all these.
absolutely no. It's
Um,
I think the discussion in the
arguments.
letter that was submitted by I get it. I fully
I do too.
understand.
I get it. I don't agree with it.
Yeah. It's just there's so anyway. So we're asking to proceed with a resolution of necessity. Basically, as the council's action says, your deferral has ended, and we need this to happen in a short order. So that's just the next step to make indication that.
So
it
if
needs
that
to go
happens, then what? Then the church and Involta have to get together and build this road?
We would
Or
probably
we build the road and bill them for it?
What's that?
We build the road and bill them for it, or they build the road? I still don't understand.
At this point, it would fall back on the church to get the road improvement.
Church.
Yes, because their surety is expired.
Okay.
They don't, and their deferral, they don't have a deferral. And Volta's the only one with the deferral. Since they replatted the
No, no, but-
property, they got to make the public improvements.
If your proposed resolution is approved, then Involta's deferral is done?
Yes,
Okay? And then they have to participate in putting in the road?
they either have to participate or make their improvement.
It'd be incumbent upon them to get together with United Methodist Church, hire one contractor, split the bill.
I mean, I'm probably not speaking 100% on the legal terms of this, but in essence, the resolution necessity saying the deferral's over, you need to figure out how to make this public improvement occur.
How long has it been deferred?
Since they've been out there.
Yeah, how long is that?
I have the memorandum was in your packet, the original one, so 2007.
Make further money.
Yeah.
Called deferred interest.
Been a lot cheaper.
Number 8 has started. It's the
Wait,
final plat
let's
for.
was there any other questions or comments or?
No.
Okay, just making sure. All right. Okay, number 8.
Number 8 is the final plat, memorandum agreement with Stonefield Commercial, first edition. This is south of Tower Terrace, west of 3rd Ave, in front of Esco Electric. You probably see some grading out there going on. Just, final plat, there's nothing really too exciting to talk about with regard to that, except that it's a commercial lot and there's development occurring. So, any questions?
That affect that piece of land we changed the zoning on for a restaurant that hasn't happened there?
I believe this piece is included in that area.
Right next to it, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think was it between Irish and 3rd? I think so. So there's not been a public identification of any users on that site though. But generally, you don't final plat unless you got something cooking.
Yeah, he does.
Yep.
I'm not worried about him.
Just for the council's, hopefully their appreciation, items 11 through 14, these are setting dates for public hearings. I asked legal, and I think they're going to shorten those titles. I hope it makes it easier on Thursday. These will all be on consent, but the next time it'll be easier. Number 15, discussion regarding zoning code updates. If you look at number 16, 17, and 18, there's some provisions. This is all setting dates for a public hearing regarding portions of the zoning code. One is rules and definitions to create new and updated definitions. Number 17 is the non-conforming section of the zoning code, basically repealing and readopting. And then number 18 identifies the establishment of new districts. It says districts and map. That's just the title of that section of the zoning code. All of this, essentially what we're doing is we're getting to the point where with the projects that are coming out, Paul had mentioned the zoning on Tower Terrace Road. If you recall the debacle that we've had out there with the hours of operations, and our zoning code is antiquated, and we need to get it to the point where it can be more simply used. So we're really proposing to move forward with creating new districts and definitions related to the districts. We are not proposing with the adoption of the districts or the definitions to rezone anything. So you'll hear a lot of times where a community will do a new zoning ordinance. They'll roll it all out. They'll have a whole lot of public information meetings and discussions, and then they'll adopt that ordinance as a whole. You guys know how thick that zoning code is. What we're trying to do is we don't have the manpower or time right now to do that. But we've got to provide some fix to our code that simplifies it, modernizes it, and just makes it more usable. Cedar Rapids, I don't know what their contract was, but they're using several consultants to go through what they're calling rezone Cedar Rapids, or something like that anyway. So they're doing it just the way I described. They're completely removing and replacing their entire zoning code. We're proposing adopt some districts with the language, and then we can proceed with rezoning property under the new districts. It's simplified, easier to use. And then what we will do is ultimately come back and rezone quadrants of the community at a time so that we're not trying to do an entire replacement of the entire code at one time. So that's kind of what we've been working on. We've got a draft of this. I did not include it in your packet. You don't have it. There's probably 33 pages. There's 33 pages of zoning, of definitions. We took these to the Planning Commission meeting a couple weeks ago. We had one person show up, had read through it, had some comments and questions, so we've tweaked some of the language in a couple of those definitions. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to is where we have a definition of each use within our zoning code, and they're more broadly defined. So we may define retail as sales of goods and services, and then we kind of broadly define that. So we're not saying that, you know, in the C3 you can have a leather goods, which is one of the identified uses, which, I mean, it's just an antiquated conversation. So we're trying to put them in buckets that are more easily definable, and they're actually more
Flexible?
Yeah. And we're not sitting here, if someone comes in and wants to sell shoes, dresses, belts, you know, it buckets them in a situation where we're not, well, you know, that code is not, it doesn't specifically allow for the sale of whatever that widget is. But if it's a retail and it's not an identified use that's a problem, other places in the code, then it should be allowed as a retail use. So that's what we're trying to accomplish within our code. Another thing that happens within our current code is the uses in the C3 include all the uses in the C2 as well as the uses in the C1. So if someone comes in and wants to open a business, you're handing them all of these pages. It's not simplified, it's not a chart, it's not easily. And honestly, it's hard for us because you can miss things. The hours of operation was a complete miss on our behalf. We didn't know it was in there. And it was, you know, you turn the page, it was the last standard under the C1 district. It was rezoned C3, but that building brought it back and included the C1 uses and that one provision. So anyway, we're trying to simplify the code. We're not out there, this isn't design standards, this isn't, you know, this isn't where all of a sudden RV parking isn't allowed in the front yard. We're just trying to kind of streamline our code and kind of prepare for some of these areas that were coming online out on the periphery.
So what will happen to businesses who maybe don't fall under the new umbrella, but they're established? Are they kind of grandfathered in unless they sell? Is that what would trigger property to conform to the updated code?
So what we'd like to do is get the districts adopted, the use list, and the definitions, which would provide the opportunity for a new property owner coming in to rezone. We'd go to the new district.
Okay.
All the other districts would remain intact. When we go back in and say, okay, well, now we want to do a whole amendment to this portion of the community, and we'll bring it in, we'll identify those, we'll have a neighborhood meeting, conversation about the changes to the code and what that means to the individual property owners in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Now, when that occurs, if there are created legal nonconforming uses, and that's one of the sections we talk about, they are considered a legal nonconforming use, which means they can continue on as they exist today without any problems at all. Now, if they go vacant for a year, they can't reestablish the use. So a metalworks facility on 7th Avenue. Let's say they're prefabbing metal manufacturer. They're on 7th Avenue, and that gets zoned commercial, and it doesn't allow industrial uses. That person gets to stay there, but let's say they go out of business, they retire, the business closes. If another metal fabricator doesn't come in there within a period of time, which I believe is a year, then that cannot be a metal fabricator business in the future because it loses its nonconformity. Current code, one of the reasons we're changing that is 2 years. So if you think about it from the perspective of the community, when we rezone, we're trying to implement our vision for the future through our comprehensive plan. If you say you want to change an area that is industrial to a commercial or whatever, you have to have some kind of time constraint that's reasonable. And at one point they said 2 years. I think 2 years is quite a long time to allow somebody to have a business that goes vacant or to sell the business and not have it reestablished for 2 years. That's a long period of time. So that's the kind of that's where we're going with this. And I would propose that I will send you this information and then present it at the work session at the next meeting in a more formal presentation. Mm-hmm. At the city council meeting, maybe before the meeting, we'll have an open house. If people want to come in and talk about it, I talked to Corey about doing a newspaper article on it this week. We could hold the public hearings at this meeting. If the council's not comfortable with it, you can continue the public hearing, you can close the public hearing, tell us to go back and do something else, and bring it. We don't have to have the action, but I would like to kind of keep this moving if the council would allow us that opportunity to at least set the hearing, hear from public. You know, if there's a lot of issues that we're not aware of. I will say that we haven't been out beating the streets trying to get public input on this. So there may be some folks that come in and say some things about it, and you know, we're happy to meet with them. It's not like I'm trying to hide it. I went to the Home Builders Association meeting last week, told them what we're doing, told them I was going to send them the stuff that we have. We presented everything at the P&Z meeting. It's been online. I can't say it's got a bunch of arrows pointing to it saying, look at this, but so we are trying to get the word out a little bit. But again, none of what we would propose would quote unquote go into effect to somebody's property until there's actually a rezoning that would occur. It would adopt it as code, but one of the things in the districts, we have 3 zoning districts that we're removing, striking, because we don't have any property that's zoned that zoning district. So we would just have zoning districts similar to those that are not being used. So anyway, does that make sense?
Yes. Can you, if it's long, can you send it before?
I'm going to try and get it out this week.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah, that's my plan. It is a lengthy packet. I'll be honest. I mean, we're trying to define every use.
Yeah.
And when I say every use, it's not like we're trying to find uses, but identify specific uses with a broad definition, so that it allows for interpretation more than we have now. I don't know if that made sense, but you'll know it when you get a chance to look at it. You'll understand what I'm saying.
Okay. Before you leave, Tom, I've got one more item to talk about under community development.
Sure.
So one item I'd like to ask for reconsideration. This would be resolution number 27007 that did not pass on July 5th. And this was regarding the preliminary site development plan for Bluebird Square located at the northeast corner of Highway 13 and 151. During the public hearing that we had on that on July 5th, Paul and I had, at least we thought we'd indicated to Mr. High that there would probably be some support to approve the preliminary plat, but we would certainly not approve the final plat at that time because there were too many open items at that point in time. But it did seem that he had made, obviously, a significant amount of investment in time for the preliminary plat for as he had proposed it. I talked to Mr. High at the end of last week. I think he was maybe a little bit confused by what we were saying or indicating, and so because he did not have that understanding, we went ahead and did not pass that on a 2-4 vote. So a number of the items we talked about, some of it was the design, some of it was the density of that property. Mr. High has indicated he's already made some changes regarding the comments that he heard. He's looking at making some design changes regarding the density as well. So I think it seems to me that we were willing to discuss approval of the preliminary plat based upon his intentions moving towards the final plat and making changes based upon the comments that he received 2 weeks ago. That with that, I'd like to have reconsideration to put that back on the agenda for Thursday.
So the way.
And so for what you would need to do procedurally to do that is that would need to be an agenda item for Thursday. You'd have to have a motion and a second, and then the council would have to pass with majority vote to place that item on there for reconsideration. So it would not come up to reconsideration until August.
So this would be to put it on the agenda for a vote on Thursday.
Right.
Yes.
I'm fairly certain on this, but we did hold the public hearing and there was action taken, but I don't think we need to republish the public hearing if it's not the intent of the council to open it back up for public comment.
Yes, just to be clear, Councilmember Jensen, what you're asking is the reconsideration of the passing of the resolution,
Not the public
opening
hearing.
public hearing.
That is correct.
Correct. And you voted with the side that prevailed, that was the noes, correct?
That is correct.
So you can properly bring the motion to reconsider,
Yes.
but anybody can second that.
Okay, so will that be on Thursday's agenda for us, or we're just going to bring it up at that point?
The key to it is the way that the agenda is run, the mayor can ask that an item be placed on the agenda, or it has to come from 2 council members. So Mr. Jensen obviously is one. If there's another council member that would like to see that on there, then we can place it on there for Thursday.
That would be great.
Okay. Not a vote, but we have to have 2.
Great. Okay, so then we'll see that Thursday. All right. Anything else, Tom?
Not for me. Thank you.
Okay, on to administration and first 2 items that are starred, I'm turning over the gavel to Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, so TIF consideration for Hobart Historic Restoration.
Yeah, the first 3 are related to a potential project that Hobart Historic Restoration has put forward to the City of Marion. They have put in an offer and negotiated a purchase agreement, a conditional purchase offer on the 1204 site. So the area up there that's been a continuing problem in the uptown where the building collapsed, they have worked with the bank. They've got a purchase agreement in place. It is contingent on a couple of things. One is that they are asking for some assistance from the city in the form of a TIF rebate. They are also anticipating putting a brownfield application into the state for the project. But the motion to receive and file will receive it as an official application. They will be here on Thursday to make a more formal presentation and answer questions for the council. And then the next step would be to direct staff to negotiate a memorandum of understanding. That sends it off to the Economic Development Committee to conduct further review and then ultimately come back to the City Council with a recommendation for the project.
Was that the project that was there previously that didn't end up happening, was there TIF on that?
There was, but nothing was awarded because it was conditional on the project proceeding. There's no value that's been created, so there's nothing there that would have been received. In order to qualify for that, you have to comply with the terms of the development agreement, and we were well past any timelines on that.
Do you recall if they had gone for the brownfield designation on that? If that would have been awarded, does that look like that's possible there?
I believe they had applied for some Grayfield credits on it. That one actually, because of the conditions on the site, would qualify under brownfield. It had some contamination from a former dry cleaners that was there, actually.
I think they got that one.
Yeah, I'd have to check back and see.
Okay. Anyone else on number 1?
So I guess I was confused. So they're proposing the exact same plan, correct?
They have worked with the architect that worked on the original building and worked with the structural engineer to try to identify what, if anything, on that site can be reused to construct the additional construct the building.
So the same building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like with the little elevator and the second floor. Okay.
One
Remain to be
that stays up.
convinced.
Yeah, not the exact same building.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah, okay.
clarify.
Yeah. One that's sturdy.
Well, that's
A little better. I have some questions, but I'll wait till Thursday, and
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
they'll
will
be
too.
answered during that presentation. So.
Okay, great. Number 4 then, Marion Mixed Use Project.
Yeah, number 4, just wanted to give the council an update on this because we're working through the process of bringing that memorandum of understanding back to the council fairly slowly. With the size of the project and the scale of what we're working on, we want to make sure that we do it right. When I had talked with the council about this the last time and kind of given you a briefing of where we were headed with it, we were looking at an assistance package in around the $11 million range for the overall project, exclusive of the library piece. And we've gone back and forth with the applicant quite a bit on how should we structure that, what makes sense to do it, and ultimately what we're going to be bringing back to the council is going to look a lot like the one that we did for the hotel over on the east end of the Central Corridor, where we would have a percentage that we would participate in the overall construction cost of the project with a maximum cap. One of the things that's been a moving target with this one is because of the time it's taken and changes in commodity prices and everything, the construction estimates change quite a bit, and that's made it difficult for us to just say this is exactly the dollar amount that we will put in. And so by going that route where we have a cap on participation but we have a percentage that we would put in, if they're able to bring in the project under budget, then we get the benefit of that. So just wanted to let you know our expectation is that we will have the MOU for you for consideration at the first council meeting in August, but wanted to let you know that that was the direction we were heading with providing the assistance. If anybody has concerns or questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them. I can provide the copy of the hotel one so you kind of know what that framework looks like and how we've done that in the past.
I have a quick question. Is there a way to safeguard the city against change orders and having to contribute toward that percentage if the architect isn't spot on or something of that nature?
That's why we put a maximum cap on our participation. So, say that we agree that we'll fund up to a maximum of 40% with an expectation that it's a $10 million project, that would be $4 million. And then if they go to 11, even though our percentage would vary, we'd still be capped at the total dollar amount. So our exposure has a maximum amount from day one.
Now, how this project moves along is, I know, kind of tied to the parkade piece of it. Are we making progress on what that's going to be like or look like, or how that's going to be managed?
Yeah, I think the proposals on the parkade will probably be at the council meeting after this one gets brought forward.
Okay.
We have seen a draft of what the parking analysis looks like from the Park Cedar Rapids folks, but they had some additional information that they wanted to put in it, wanted to do a little bit more evaluation of the traffic or the parking loads earlier in the week during the evenings, just to make sure they had everything clear. We're supposed to have the final version of that by the 28th or the 29th, and that would allow us to start moving that piece of this forward to council.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to turn the gavel back over to the mayor for 5.
This is the brick house over on the site between City Hall and the library that was the former urban vintage home. I know there's been a lot of discussions about this because Marion does have a limited number of brick homes, and where normally we would go through and put a building out for demolition just for a straightforward demolition bids, what we've been talking about internally is following a different process for this one to actually more do a request for proposals to see if anyone is interested in salvage rights on the building, whether that would be demolition, whether that would be salvaging some of the pieces of architectural interest in it. Mike and Tom have been working on this as far as how that would be structured with Tim Rock to provide an opportunity to potentially move or save the building or salvage the materials out of it before we would proceed forward with full-on demolition. Did I cover everything, Mike?
Kind of what we have proposed on the previous properties, the 3600 and 3630, how we did those was not a property demo, but actually a property disposal contract. And that way you're getting two things and you're not slowing the process down. But if someone wants to come in and buy the building and then move it, they could, say, do a bid for $5, and that's obviously cheaper than demoing the building. And then they would have to pay then to move it, take care of the utilities, all that stuff. So for 3630, what we had was we had an individual that bought the double wide, and so they moved that. Obviously, that's on wheels, a little easier to move than a brick building. But that is an option. That's kind of how we propose to do it. But with that, it wouldn't hurt. Like there's the Save CR group. There's certain groups that we could reach out to so that if they had people that were interested in moving it. I think Dave had an estimate of $150,000 to $200,000 just to move that brick building. And so I don't know if anyone wants to do that or not, but if that was out there in the community that they wanted to save that building rather than let the bulldozers have it, that's something that we can reach out and do that extra reach to see if that's something that someone is actually interested in doing.
What's the realistic expectation that someone's going to move it? I mean, it's probably not likely. We've been told it's impossible to move without without it falling apart.
But that's why we
So-
wanted to have the discussion with you guys, so that we just don't go get demo
So-
quotes and you guys stop us at that process, because that could close the.
Yeah. I mean, well, let's take some comments, I guess.
Well,
Anybody?
you know, I felt strongly, we have a place right up 6 we can move it to. And I think, in my opinion, you know, it was built in 1867, the brick part of it, and we have a limited number of brick homes, historic in our community. I think that we should be allowed to use TIF money, local option sales tax money. I think we could apply to the state for some money, and I think we need to try to move forward with a thought of taking down the frame portion of that house and going back to the Greek Revival brick that's there. It's 3 and 4 foot, there are 4 bricks thick, much like my house at 610 10th. And with a number on our inventory of brick homes that were built in Marion, out of Marion bricks, that bricks were made here, those of us who believe in history, it's a very important thing.
What's the possibility of building the ramp around it, around the brick portion, and just, like Paul said, take down the frame portion, and it's been done. It would say that we care about our history.
Be very rentable, I think, with what's going on.
I think it would be impressive to people that we went to that extent. We don't have, those types of buildings are what give Marion the character that people like that are moving here. I'm just curious, what's the possibility of building the ramp around? It's not that big. Or
Once the frame part of it's off.
A notch in the ramp and build it around it.
The current ramp design, that's where the ramp would start. That's where the circulator inside of the building would start. Not to say that it's impossible to make an adjustment to that. We would just have to go back to the ramp designers and see what they could do. What I would say, though, in response to what Paul is talking about, is the process that Mike is outlining gives someone the ability to do that. They have the ability to come to us through this process and make that proposal to salvage the home, move the home, marshal the resources to do it. It provides the opening to do that rather than it just being a demolition bid. Because I think what we'd have to do in that case is we really have to determine, is the private sector interested in doing something like that?
Can we use some lost money? Can we get some tip money? Can we get some hotel motax money?
That could all
Those
be part
are all
of
available.
That could all be part of a proposal.
Because the bids that were obtained are between something like 120 to 150, I think. Or the estimates, they weren't actual bids. They were just sort of estimates of what it might be. But we know it's in that range. I don't know how realistic that is, if someone's going to want to pay to move it.
I mean, I understand the historical significance of the house, and I do appreciate it. And once you get some of those additions off there, you probably can see it in a much more better perspective on really what it looks like and appreciate it even more. The part I would hope, if we do proceed forward on this, that this gets in the hands of some private owner, not in the hands of the city. I'm not interested in the city having more real estate like that to have to manage and maintain and care for.
Yeah,
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So.
Okay. I just think it's worth trying to say that we tried to do what we could to save it.
From the
I've said
perspective
how I
of
feel.
the building it around, I mean, I think the community that would want to save it would be happier if it was saved somewhere else.
But if that's not possible.
Well, I don't know that it's not possible. I mean, we've got
Well,
the
I
quotes,
think-
but I mean, it's an option. I think there's really 3 options. You save it where it is, the public moves it or the private moves it. That's
Well, to me, that's one of those cases where if we go back to Knutson and to Emerson and say, what would happen if you do this? And they look at it and come back to us and say, well, it's a $400,000 increase to the overall cost of the ramp. At that point, it does start to become more economical to actually relocate the house. That's where you can actually make that balancing act and make that decision in what's the best interest of the public. Because if it means keeping it's an existing spot means that the cost of the parking ramp go up, and say because it's 3 or 4 floors tall that we lose 35 overall parking spaces, then the council can make that judgment and balance, well, here's the long-term versus the historic, and balance those two against each other and then make that decision.
So is there an estimated time frame or timeline we're talking about, and when we want that out of there? I mean, we're talking next spring, this fall? I mean, there's obviously the parkade's a little ways off yet.
Ideally, you'd be putting footings in the ground this fall so that they could do construction through winter on the main floor of the parkade.
But we don't even have that designed
Not
yet.
This is a really kind of a moot discussion then.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why we're even having this discussion, to be honest, at this point then.
Yeah, we had a parkade over here that fell apart, so. I think you could move that house.
I feel like we're going through motions here, I'm sorry.
3.5
to be honest.
blocks. There's somebody who would take that house if we can come up the money to move it there.
But I think that's why we're having the conversation now. I mean, we could let the council could let a demo contract for them all in 30 days after the asbestos studies are done, and they'd all be down in the fall. I mean, so I mean that's why we're bringing it up, and I know we've danced around that conversation for a long period of time, but we gotta. I think staff needs a resolve just as much as I think Paul or anybody would want to have some resolve on what to do with it. We just don't want it to come down to the last minute.
But if it's not realistic to move it at this point because you're up against your deadline to put in footings,
I don't know.
what's the point of the conversation?
I don't know that it would be. I mean, if someone
Isn't
came
that what
in
you're
and
saying?
wanted it in 30 days, I think. I mean, it's going to have to be someone that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, at this point, we don't have designs on the ramp or anything like that, but they're at the point where they're going to start needing to do that. So we need to have resolution on the house in order to make that move to the next step. If it's going to stay where it is and the ramp design is going to change around it, this is the time to do that and start making those decisions. You know, somebody that wants to move that house, you know, speaking from prior experience with the weight of brick houses, they actually usually prefer to do those in the winter because then you've got the ground frozen underneath the street, and they weigh a lot, and you take a lot less risk of having damage to the street if you've got that frost underneath it. There's some well-publicized cases of them moving houses like that just because of at that time of the year for those specific reasons. But this is the time to have the conversation so that we know where we need to be when the full-on ramp design needs to start.
Are we talking about the parkade taking up that entire block?
Yes.
So it will.
Mm-hmm. And the plan would call for the front on the main floor where it faces 6th Avenue would be retail space.
Mike, would our streets even support that house?
I honestly don't know how much it weighs, but that's kind of the home builders or home movers. I mean, they're supposed to put enough wheels and axles underneath there to handle the load. I mean, it might be tires, touching tires, but I don't know what it weighs.
They moved the Czech Museum in Cedar Rapids.
Yeah.
I would say they could.
They're moving a house coming up here that's on the hold harmless agreement, so that's not a brick house.
Yeah.
Well, they're not moving it off of 11th and 7th, or 11th and whatever side street that is either.
Does it make sense just to get a quote, like a real quote?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a step, and that would move us off center. At least the dollars that we're all talking about would be.
We have a house mover that's going to be in town.
Well, yeah, I'd love to talk some real numbers and see what they think about moving it. If we haven't done that already, that makes a lot of sense.
At the same time, I would suggest that we, and I'm happy to, well, I would suggest that you talk to the developer or whoever's building the ramp or designing the ramp to see if it can be designed with that remaining there in case it can't be moved. and what that does. The thing is, there are cities all over that are trying to create the feeling that we have down here. They're trying to create the atmosphere that already exists here that can't be replicated with new buildings. It just can't. I just want to take that into consideration.
And it is being tested right now for asbestos, so we'll know that as well.
And if you strip off all those additions, I mean, it's got a
Oh, yeah, you can move
smaller
it.
footprint in the
Frame-
corner, so I
Frame
mean,
part of it has to come off anyway.
oh yeah, that looks terrible on it.
So how do you, if I just call out the elephant in the room here, let's say a private sector wants to buy this, redevelop it or restore it, what market value does it have in the future when you got this parkade wrapped around it? What, I'm losing sight of the trees for the forest here. I mean, I can see if a historical value wants to keep it as a museum, but as a residence that it's going to be potentially rented out, I'm just, where's the resale value in this thing down the road when some family member's ready to get out of it? I'm just trying to be realistic here.
Business-wise.
It's been used for business. It's not, no one lives in it.
Yeah, if you keep it in the uptown district, it's very rentable for business, I think.
Right.
Somebody could rent it.
Right, residence or commercial,
It is,
whatever.
to me, it's a simple thing. You say, ooh, if you want to build the mall, move the house.
Mhm.
Paul, you bring up moving it down 6th Avenue, or down to a spot on 6th.
6th Avenue to 8th, yeah.
So there's a
6th Avenue,
developer
8th.
that has agreed to have it in that location, or
Pardon me?
is there someone that's agreed to move it or to take it in that location?
She agreed originally that she would put the foundation in to take it, yes. I don't know, I haven't talked to her for a long time, but
So isn't there,
that would be corner. She'd have a brick house on each corner.
isn't there a plan in for approval? Nothing, okay.
We've received plans for the site, but they were not forwarded to planning.
They're
They were asked to
preliminary,
be,
I think.
yeah, they were preliminary, and she asked to have those.
I just think we need to find out, can we do it?
Agreed. Agree.
That's-
Okay.
Okay.
Speaking of brick houses, the number 6 is a contract modification for the house at 524 10th Street. This would be the lease amendment for the McGowan House to allow it to be transferred from Allison, who is retiring, over to the new operator of the business.
Okay.
Just somebody taking over the business that's in there.
Yeah, Cassie Hammermeister, who's been working with Allison and has been operating out of the upstairs, is going to be taking over the entire facility.
That house is about the same age, by the way.
For my benefit, on the McGowan House, is it required by the city to always own that, or can that be put back into private hands?
The donation agreement, from what I recall, did not specify that it had to stay in city ownership.
Does not. I'd, in the future, entertain some discussion about selling that.
Number 7 and number 8 are related to the operations of the Local Option Sales Tax Committee. Resolution number 23655 had actually increased the membership of the committee to 9. They've had some vacancies and have been functioning with a lower number than that, and I believe they met and thought that going back to 7 would be fine, would be acceptable, and so that would reduce the size of it. And then the second one, do you want to cover that? Did you do that amendment, Ryan? Okay. I know Randy's been involved in these discussions. I personally haven't, but one of the things with the role of the local option sales tax committee, that has changed. And so what this resolution seeks to do is to reconcile what they have been doing with the capital improvement programming, capital improvement planning process that the city has established. At the time that the local option sales tax committee was put in place, the council was not going through an annual CIP process where we involve the public, have hearings and everything. And in many ways, the local option sales tax committee, for that piece of it, was functioning as a de facto CIP committee. And this will reconcile it. It takes them out of that role and recognizes that the city now has a more established CIP process that is much more involved with public input.
Here at their meeting, what's the absentee rate of members?
I'd have to look back and see, Paul. Yeah. Ever since we ever since the airport committee was established, usually those meetings are on the same night. So I've been going to airport and have not been at the Lost Committee ones for a while.
Do they have a 3 and out rule or anything?
I don't even recall, Paul. I believe they do, but.
So we're basically talking about taking it from 9 to 7?
Mm-hmm.
And how would we determine the 2 people? Do we just let it time out with expirations of terms at the end of the year?
We have 7 right now.
There are only 7 right now. We wouldn't even have to let 2 people go, so to speak.
I believe so.
So here's my question. If we're having problems with the quorum, from what I hear for the last several meetings, would going down in numbers be a smart idea, since we can't even get a quorum when we're at 9 right now?
Well, it reduces the number that you have to have in order to constitute a quorum. Because right now, with a group of 9, it takes 5, it goes to 4.
4.
They're the oversight committee.
And then I would question too, like Paul asked, missed 3 meetings and you're out type of thing. Because again, if there's 9 or maybe there's only 7 and you can't get a quorum, there's obviously people that are not showing up very regularly.
What's been happening with that organization as well too is sometimes there's not enough topic throughout the year, so sometimes those meetings are foregone and they don't meet as often as they used to. So when you have those meetings can somewhat meet, and sometimes they don't, and so sometimes that creates that inconsistency. So, when the original, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lon, because I may be speaking out of turn here, but originally when this was drafted and put together at 7, it was because each member of the council, the city council, appointed or nominated an individual to be on this committee. Later on, it was suggested that it would go to 9 to make that increase. But it is a struggle. I was on this committee in 2017, and we just barely made quorum. So it's one of those things where it's an interest. There's also discussion as to the topic with the CIP that we have now. There's some things that are a little bit more structured and called out, where the oversight committee is really essentially to read the material to make sure that decisions are being based on what the ballot language was, that things were being appropriated correctly to the right category, if you will, and it still carries an essential part to that. But as we form that CIP and bring this together, that kind of helps mold that and brings that back together. So it really, though I think it's scheduled to meet monthly, it's only based on if there's any new any new topic for discussion. So it may only essentially meet
Quarterly.
3 times a year.
All you need.
Yeah. So this was just kind of cleaning things up a little bit with it, trying to help the organization try to keep that, the numbers and the attendance up, obviously, and still do its job.
Can you clarify number 8 for me then? Because I guess so this is going to make a separate committee for just local option sales tax, and then there'll be another committee for a CIP?
No, this one is amending the resolution that originally established the local option sales tax committee. It's not creating a new one. The CIP, though, really falls in the lap of the city council, because ultimately the city council can't delegate away that fiduciary responsibility that you have. Ultimately, you're the ones that are responsible for making sure that the local option sales tax is spent in compliance with the ballot language, because the voters have no recourse against an appointed body like the local option sales tax committee. If they're not happy with how you're spending the dollars, then that gets reflected at the ballot box. With an appointed body, you just don't have that link. So the city council can't really give that responsibility away to another organization or another group.
Have we tried to just schedule 3 or 4 meetings a year and target them like in January, like one a quarter? So people can get it on their calendars and have the quorum?
I believe what Amanda has discussed with the group is to look at them having a meeting that's tied into the CIP process, that as the CIP is developed and as the spending plan is outlined for what the local option sales tax dollars are going to be used for, that committee would meet, review them, give them a thumbs up or thumbs down, but review it on the slate of projects rather than viewing individual projects. One of the things that you have to be careful with is that, according to their charter, they're supposed to judge, does it fit the ballot language or not. That group isn't there to judge whether the city should do that project or not, or whether that should be the priority project for the lost dollars to be used for. That's the city council's job, and that's what really has been shifted back over to the city council with the CIP planning process, is establishing those priorities and determining where the dollars should be spent. So at that point, it really does become more of a true review committee, but they're looking at those projects really as an entire project list and not as one in isolation. The times that they could be brought together, I would think that the council could say, if there's something that comes up where there is a question and you're talking about rededicating dollars from one fund to another for a specific project, you could always call the committee together and ask them to meet and review that and give you a recommendation.
Is that it?
That's all I got.
That was the last one.
I have a quick question. I would like to go back to making a motion to bring this issue back to the agenda.
Bluebird?
Yes, the Bluebird project. When we bring something for a reconsideration, what does that do? Does that eliminate this is a question for you, Lon, does that eliminate the process of going back through the planning and zoning department to be recommended back to city council for that? I'm trying to understand. This is passed through. Should he decide to resubmit these plans, it would come back to the agenda anyway, or does that have to go back through the planning and zoning? I'd like to understand that, because I don't quite understand how something just comes back up because of one council member's request to review that.
When you're making the request for reconsideration, the item to be brought back is to be reconsidered in its original form. Now, the city council at that point has some discretion about what you do with it. So, like in the case with this, if Mr. High was coming in and proposing some substantial revisions to his preliminary site development plan, you could say, okay, there's been enough changes to this that we would like it to go back through the Planning and Zoning Commission process for review for another recommendation to come back to the city council. But because of the nature of this one, it is kind of a layered process. You've got the preliminary site development plan, and then you have a final site development plan that then also has to come back forward for approval. But typically, you're supposed to bring it back and act on it in the form in which it was originally presented. So in this case, it was the approval of a preliminary site development plan.
So his proposal cannot come back anything other altered than what was originally drafted? And he will be then given a second chance to plead his project.
The resolution would come back in its original form. He can present additional information at that time. So if he's made revisions to the site plan, to density, design, he certainly would be able to present that to you at that point. The wording of the resolution wouldn't change as far as approving the site development plan, but you would have to make a judgment call about whether or not you felt comfortable approving it, depending on the scale and how much change he's actually made to that site development plan, and whether that would need to be kicked back for additional review.
You can table it requested to go back to P and Z.
Correct.
Right, but in this case, we actually broke from P and Z, who approved it to go forward, and then it failed here.
Right.
We're allowing it to be represented again, which is what I'm not understanding as to being the proper procedure. If in the context of a conversation privately held with another council member has led that council member to allow this to be asked to be brought back for a second reconsideration, I'm asking myself, why are we not allowing that to go through P&Z before it comes back to us again? In my mind, I don't feel that is the proper process here.
Yeah,
I'm
and
just
when you-
asking a general question.
The process for reconsideration, a council member on the prevailing side at the immediate following council meeting, when after action was taken, can ask that an item be placed back on the agenda for reconsideration. Once it's placed back on the agenda for reconsideration, then the council has discretion about what you do with that. But the item itself, the wording in the resolution, all that has to be brought back in the form in which it was originally presented. So, for example, Mr. Jensen couldn't say, I'd like to place that item on the agenda for reconsideration, but I'd like these words in the agenda or in the resolution to be changed, because then it's a different resolution. When I'm saying that it has to be brought back in its original form, that's what I'm referencing. But what you do with it as a city council after it's placed back there on that agenda item you have some discretion. And I will say that, I don't know that this is exactly 100% in compliance with Robert's Rules of Order, but Robert's Rules of Order also bends to local custom, and that's been how council has handled these items in the past.
I would submit, as one of the people on the prevailing side, I just want to hear what he has to say. We could determine after what he tells everybody that maybe he told Steve that's making Steve reconsider, we can still push it back to P&Z and follow that process you're talking about. But this gives us the benefit in public to hear what Mr. High.
So what is Mr. High bringing it back as, though, as more of a instrument to more information, or are we bringing it back as the resolution to approve the preliminary? Because that's what it was at the last meeting, correct?
Yeah, it's the resolution to approve the preliminary. It gets put on there as...
So we're allowing him to have a second option to pass for the primary, or the preliminary site again.
Well, I think at the last meeting, at the July 5th meeting, Randy, again, my bringing it back was not as much about the conversation I had with Mr. High. It's as much about the fact that he may have not quite understood what Paula and I were talking about, is that we thought his project was far enough along, had enough detail, although there were certainly enough comments and discussion from the city council about some other things we would like to see, but the project overall, again, it had P&Z approval, but we were still looking for some other things, density being probably one of the key things that we were focusing on. And given how far that project was along, there were, at least Paul and I were making the indication that we probably might have support to get this approved for the preliminary plat, but would not get approval on July 5th for the final plat, because both of those were on the agenda. So we said, we're pretty comfortable as a preliminary plat, but it is not going to go to a final plat unless he takes into consideration all of our comments, all of our suggestions and ideas. So
taking that information,
exactly.
though, the outcome of the developer doesn't change. It's the outcome of what the council chose at that time. So the developer coming back and re-explaining, I don't see what the change is there. The vote was made. It can be changed, modified, and brought back through the process to be approved. Am I correct? But we chose, you're asking for us to create a second vote for this.
Right.
Based on what we think may be the same information, correct?
I anticipate you'll get additional information in 2 weeks anyway.
With a primary outcome being different than what the previous vote has held.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I needed. I need clarification on that.
Okay.
Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.